Excellent, excellent, excellent. Well, good morning and welcome. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chris. I'm the lead pastor here at Hoboken Grace, and we are in the middle of a conversation called the Love Project. And we are looking at how Jesus, as he steps into our story, he steps in and he begins to shift our vision of love. He steps in and says, listen, do you think love looks like this? But it actually looks like this. And you think love works this way, but it actually works like this. And all of us have a vision of love. We have a vision of what our lives are going to look like. Inside of that, we have a vision of what relationships are going to look like. We have a vision of what love is going to look like. If you haven't been with us for the past couple of weeks, go back and watch or listen to it online. We've broken down what that looks like, how Jesus begins that process. And over the next couple of weeks, what we're going to do is we're looking at how he steps in and he begins to shift it, not just theoretically, but practically. Last week, we talked about how he shifts it from our vision of love, which is spontaneous, and in a moment, I feel it and I do it, to something that's intentional. I do it no matter how I feel. And then this week, we're building on that. And I know Anthony said this earlier, but I'm going to say it again because some of you didn't listen to him. If you have kids in this service, you need to take them out. Take them to Grace Kids. We encourage you to do this all the time, but I'm telling you, you don't want to be leaving in the middle of this conversation. And if you have kids with you, you will be leaving in the middle of this conversation. So make sure that you take them out now. Grace Kids is incredible. They'll take great care of them, and you won't have to explain a lot of interesting things later. But today we're building on it, and we're looking at specifically how our vision of love begins with us. It begins with me. It begins with what I want. It begins with what I want to experience. It begins with what I want love to look like. And we shape that from a lot of different places, from the movies that we watch, the other relationships that we have. We begin to develop, as we're growing up, we begin to develop a vision of love. Now, some of you have never thought about this before, so this may be something entirely new for you. But we develop this vision of love, and the interesting thing about it is this. We develop our vision of love before we ever meet the person that we love. You developed your vision of love, of what your relationship was going to look like before you ever met the person that you love. It really had nothing to do with them. It had everything to do with you. We have a vision of love that starts with us, and it serves us. Jesus steps into our lives, and he presents us with a very different vision of love. He presents us with a vision of love that isn't about him, but it's about the one that he loves. So as you look at how he brings us into this story, his vision of love is all about how he's going to love you. He doesn't bring you to the story because, you're going to love me so well. He doesn't bring you to the story because, you're going to serve me in some special way. He said, no. From the very beginning, my vision of love was about how I was going to serve you. There's this really powerful moment when Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he's trying to help them understand leadership, and he's trying to help them understand the world. He's saying, you guys look at this the whole wrong way. And then he says this, Mark chapter 10, verse 45, Jesus is addressing his disciples, and he says, for even the Son of Man, he says, even me, even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And as we've been talking about, as we walk through this series, the cross was not something that happened on a whim. It wasn't just because Jesus felt something and so he acted. No. This was planned from the beginning of the story. From the beginning of the story, he planned a love that was not about how he would be loved, not about how he would be served, but a love that was all about the ones that he would serve. And for those of you who are here and you're exploring this, whole idea of what Jesus is and who Jesus is and what this is about, you need to understand this. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you've been. It doesn't matter what you've done. Before God even began to set this thing into motion, he not only planned for you to be a part of this, but he planned to go to that cross and give his life for you. As Ephesians 2 says, he planned to give up everything that was rightfully his so that he could have what he loved, which is you. And for many of you, you've been told that this story is about how God can be served. No. No, God's vision of love isn't. It's not about him. It's about the one that he loves. It's about you and how he, from the very beginning, decided that he was going to serve you and go to that cross for you so that you could be forgiven, so that you could be part of his family. His vision of love doesn't begin with him. It begins with the ones that he loves. It's an incredible contrast to our vision of love, because our vision of love is all about us. And we grow up and we shape it and we form it. And then this is what we do. We develop our vision of love. This is what love looks like. This is what a relationship looks like. And then we go out and we interview people for the position. We develop the role in the movie. We know what the movie is supposed to look like in our lives. And we say, this is what my story is going to look like. This is what my movie is going to look like. And then we audition people for the role in that movie. Which is why at the beginning, we constantly lie to each other. Constantly lie to each other because we know that this is happening. If you're dating right now, you know that this is happening. You know you're auditioning. You're auditioning for the role, and you're auditioning them, and you're trying to figure out, okay, do they fit the role in my story? And does she fit the role in my story? Does he fit the role in my story? You see what's happening in that video. It's all about the audition. It's all about the interview process. I love how Anthony talks about it. He says when you start dating, you don't actually meet the person, you just meet their representative. It's the person that they send ahead of them to represent them and make their way through the interview process. And we try to figure out, do you fit my vision? Why? Because I'm not building my vision around you. No, the vision's around me. You built your vision of love before you ever met the person that you love. And here's the thing, almost none of us changed it when we met them. We just expect them to play their role. And when you meet someone that you feel like fills that role, when you meet someone who auditions well, and they tell you, no, I love watching football all Sunday afternoon. It's amazing. Some of you feel so deceived because in the interview process, they told you they love football. And now she won't let you watch football anymore. No. I agree 100%. Why would anyone eat anything but organic? Why is our grocery bill so high? We walk through the interview process and we find someone that we feel like fits our vision best. We step into a relationship with them. And what we love, listen, come here. What we love is not the person. What we love is our vision. What we love is our vision. And as long as that person fills their role in our vision, we love them. But the moment that they don't, we start saying things like, I don't know what's happening. I just don't feel about them the way that I did before. You never loved them. You loved your vision, and they fit well in that vision for a little while. Which is why for some of you, you move from person to person to person to person to person to person to person. And they fit the vision for a little while, but then they don't. And so you look for someone new. Remember what we talked about in week 1. Our vision of love doesn't hold up in a broken world when it encounters broken people. The moment our vision encounters a broken world and broken people, it crumbles. And a big part of that is that we developed a vision that's about us. Let me ask you something. And I know for some of you, you're hearing, you say, I'm not in a romantic relationship. This doesn't just apply to romantic relationships. This applies to friendships. It applies to every relationship in our lives. Let me just ask you something. What would shift in your relationship, whether it's a friendship, romantic relationship, marriage, what would shift if your vision of love, if you sat down and you said, okay, I'm going to start from scratch. I'm going to rebuild this thing. What would shift if you sat down and developed a vision of love that was built entirely around the person that you love? Around what you know makes them feel loved. Around what you know about their personality, what you know about their dreams, and what you know about their hopes. When I began to prepare for this series, I was not prepared for how this was going to hit me. And a couple of weeks ago, as I was working through this, I was floored by the fact that my vision of love is not built around Anna. It's built around me. Because if it was built around Anna, it would look very different. What would it look like if it was built around them instead of being built around you? You see, to love someone is to build a vision of love that's built around them. To build a vision of love that's built around, specifically, serving them. Which is why God is so intentional about talking to us, about making sure that we pay attention to character inside of our relationships, because you don't want to serve a fool for the rest of your life. But he says you need to pay attention to character, and then when you find someone who has character, and as you walk through this life and you encounter the people around, I want for you to begin to develop a vision of love that's based around them, not based around you, and how you can serve them. It's an amazing shift in the way in which we look at love. And if you will be honest about it, I don't think there's anyone in this room that it doesn't impact. Where does your vision of love start? Now, as we've talked about this, and as we've been walking through this series, we've said over and over again, we're not just going to talk about this theoretically, but we're also going to talk about this practically. And so when we look at this shift, the shift from, okay, this is about me, to no, love is about the other person and how I can serve them, and developing a vision of love that's about them and how I can serve them. There are all sorts of different ways that you can apply this inside of a relationship. There are all sorts of different aspects of love that this encounters and that this impacts. But I want to talk about one in particular, and it may be a surprise to you as we go into it because you might not be expecting that this would be the application that we talk about. But I want to talk to you about how this impacts sex. Let's talk about sex. Let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk about sex. Because this drastically impacts the way that we look at sex. I want to take you to an interesting passage. It's found in the book of 1 Corinthians. Paul, the Apostle Paul, who originally hated the church, was trying to destroy the church, but he encountered this Jesus who serves and loves, this Jesus who gave his life for him. It changed everything. And he begins to go throughout the Roman Empire, communicating the truth of who Jesus is and what Jesus has done and what Jesus' love looks like. And one of the churches that he had the opportunity to start was in this city called Corinth, and he's writing to them in 1 Corinthians. And they had asked him a question. They had said, help us to understand sex. We understand, we don't understand it, so how do we interact with sex? And he's writing back to them, and he says something really interesting. He's walking through this whole understanding of sex and how to be able to engage sex and how to be able to do that in a healthy way inside of marriage. And then he comes to this point and he says this. Listen to what it says. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, beginning of verse 3. It says this. It says, the husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. In the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife. Do not deprive each other except by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come back together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. He's helping them to understand sex. In the midst of it, he says, and then husbands and wives, you need to look at it this way. And he begins to lay out for them an understanding of sex as it pertains to service. Now you need to know something. What he says in this passage was radical when he wrote it. Because in the first century, husbands dominated their wives. It didn't matter what she felt. And he's writing and saying, no, that's not how it works. That's not how Christ's love works. Christ's love, you love one another equally. And you value one another equally. And so husbands, you need to submit in the same way. And your body doesn't just belong to you. It belongs to her. And he says, I want for you to begin to engage one another in sex as an act of service. Now, typically, when we engage service, it's all about me. It's about whether or not I'm in the mood, whether or not I feel like it, whether or not. He says, no. Inside of a marriage relationship, what I want you to do, it's not about whether or not you're in the mood. It's about whether or not she's in the mood. It's not about whether you're in the mood. It's about whether or not he's in the mood. And I want for you to serve one another in this way. He says, don't deprive one another. Don't deprive one another unless it's for prayer. And I'm willing to bet that not many of you have turned to your spouse and said, no, not tonight. I have to pray. I'm willing to bet that's never happened in this entire room. He says that's the only reason. That's the only reason outside of that, and don't miss what he's saying. Don't miss what he's saying. He's saying, I want for sex to be a unique way in which you serve one another in marriage. God wants for sex to be a unique way in which you serve one another in marriage. And again, this isn't about you. This is about them. I want for you to look at not just love different. I want for you to look at sex differently. So as you're in a marriage relationship, I want for you to serve one another like this. Now, inside of marriage, sex is complicated. Not the actual act, that's pretty simple. But relationally, emotionally, sex is complicated. And I know for some of you who are single, you think, oh, I'll get married and sex will be easy. That's not actually true at all. He says, I want for you to serve one another in this way. If this is going to happen, there's some shifts that need to happen in our lives in the way that we look at sex. There are things that need to change. And I want to talk about this from two perspectives. One, I want to talk about it from the perspective of wives, because there's this lie in our culture that for men, sex is just about getting off. Sex is just about a feeling that they want to feel, and they're driven to feel this feeling, and that's all it's about. Wives, if you're going to love and serve your husband well in sex, you have to change that. You see, one of the ways in which he wants to love you is through sex. And it drives me crazy when I hear people say, well, for women, sex is emotional, and for men, it's not. That's not true. And there are a lot of different things that can lead to that. And if you allow yourself to consistently be exposed to porn, that can happen. And all of a sudden, sex becomes just about getting off. But that's not what sex was meant to be. And sex can be a lot more than that in your life. Men are incredibly physical beings. And one of the ways that we communicate love is through a physical act, and we want to love the other person. He wants to love you through that. That's not just about him getting off. I love to be able to watch this with my boys, because I see them expressing themselves to one another physically. The way that my little boys express that they love each other is that they tackle each other at full force. And they do it over and over and over again. And they just grow closer and closer and closer. But there's this lie in our culture, and we've bought into it. And I'll talk to couples, and she says, yeah, well, we just have sex until he has an orgasm, and then that's it. It's about so much more than that. You have to understand, no, he wants to love you in this, which means that you have to make it a priority. One of the ways that you serve him is that you make it a priority. You make it a priority to enjoy sex as much as he does, which doesn't come as natural to you. We come to sex from very different places, men and women. I'm talking typically, this isn't true across the board. There's always exceptions, but typically we come to it from very different places. We come to it different sex drives. And so men are driven much more by hormones. There's been different studies where they've put hormone patches on women for them to experience hormones that men experience, and they freak out. Like, oh my gosh, this is what your life looks like. This is insane. You feel like this all the time? He's like, yeah. All the time. And we come at it from different awarenesses of our body. Men typically are much more aware of what feels good to them than a woman. It takes longer for her to realize that and discover that. But it's important for you to do that. We connect it with love in different ways. For men, typically, this is the way that we communicate love. For women, it's more affection. Which is why foreplay is usually more important to her, because it's more affection. That's how I communicate and experience love. But this is an incredible act of love for him. To be able to love you in this way. And wives, one of the ways that you serve him is to be able to figure out, okay, what does feel good to me and what doesn't feel good to me, and to be honest about it and to talk about it. Some of you are here and you've been married for years and you've never talked about sex. Because again, this goes back to what we talked about in the first week. We think this is supposed to just come natural to us. We think you're just supposed to know. Some of you have never had a conversation with one another about what you actually like or don't like. Because of the fact that you think, oh, you're just supposed to know. And so our entire sex education is something that we took in school for a year, which was awkward and weird, or the 5-page book that your parents read to you. Outside of that, most of us learned most of what we know about sex from the fool in our class who had sex first. Is this not true? Is this not true? The person with the least amount of character and the biggest fool in our class who had sex first is the one who educated all of us. That's who we learned about sex from. And then we wonder, why is it that sex causes so many problems inside of our marriage? It's not, you're not just going to know. You need to talk about it. You need to learn about it. And wives, one of the ways that you serve him is that you learn, okay, what is it that feels good to me? And you're honest with him about that so that he can love you through that. Husbands, one of the ways that you serve her is to be able to make sure that, no, I'm not just going to. You make sure that this isn't just about a feeling, that I'm not just going to get off, but no, I'm going to make sure that she enjoys it. I'll never forget. I will never forget walking out of my wedding. You would think it because you would think it would be because of the celebration and all the people who are, throwing rice and all this stuff. But the reason why I'll never forget it is this. I barely remember anything else about the end of my wedding except for the fact that my uncle walks up to me. My uncle is massive. He's like 6'3", looks like a linebacker. And so when he wraps his arms around you, you basically disappear. So my uncle walks up to me, he wraps his arms around me, I disappear, and then he leans over and he whispers something in my ear. And I'm expecting him to say like, oh, you guys are a great couple. Praying for you, excited for you, what a beautiful day. All the things everyone else has said to me. He leans over and whispers in my ear, he says, you make sure she climaxes first. I told you to take your kids upstairs. He was trying to teach me this passage. In that moment, he did more than just about anyone else in my life to help me understand this passage. He was saying, Chris, sex is about service. It's about serving someone that you love inside of a marriage relationship. And men, you love her when you do the work, figure out what feels good and what doesn't. A commitment that Anna and I made early on is that when we have sex, it's never that just one of us has an orgasm. No matter how long it takes, you do the work to serve the other person. You serve. Because sex ultimately, God's dream for sex ultimately is about how we serve one another. A unique way in which we serve one another inside of a marriage relationship. And again, I'm telling you guys, if you let porn into your life, it so radically destroys this. I love this passage in Proverbs chapter 5. It says, may your fountain be blessed. And they're going to bring it up on the screen. May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth. A loving doe, a graceful deer. May her breast satisfy you always. May you ever be captivated by her love. And you look at this, I just want to break this down for you, because just in case you're missing this at the beginning, the fountain is what you think. It's a picture. And I love this passage. And I share this passage with every couple that comes through our premarital class, because my dream for every marriage inside of our church family, I believe God's dream for every marriage that exists, is that you would be able to serve and satisfy one another for the rest of your lives. But guys, if you allow porn in, it destroys your ability to experience that. It twists and perverts your desires. You become attracted to things that you never should have been attracted to. It perverts your attraction. You become attracted to things that aren't even real. And all of a sudden, rather than being satisfied with her, you want her to be something that she's not. It perverts your sex drive. I had a conversation with someone a couple years ago, and they said, I don't think you can change your sex drive. That's absurd. You absolutely can change your sex drive, and it's absolutely impacted by what you put into your life. And if you're fueling your life with porn, and if you're fueling your life with watching affairs and sex on TV, and you're filling your life with music that's all about sex, guess what? Your sex drive is going to be perverted and twisted, and it's going to go into hyperdrive, and the other person's going to be like, this isn't really about you loving me. This is just about what you can get. It screws up the whole thing. And for some of you here, and that's a part of your life, if it's a part of your life, our elders and our teams are going to be down here afterwards. We've helped people walk out of that. We can help you walk out of it too. And you can restore it in your life. But you have to get rid of it. If sex is going to be what God created it to be inside of your story, inside of your relationship, God says, no, I created sex to be this unique and beautiful way in which you serve one another inside of marriage. And I know some of you are sitting here and you're thinking, because whenever I talk to people about this, they say to me, yeah, that's why it's so important that you have sex before you get married, so that you can find out if you're sexually compatible. You got to know if you're sexually compatible. Let me just shoot that down real quick, okay? The idea of sexual compatibility is based on the flawed idea or the flawed foundation that you are going to be sexually static. In other words, the idea that I'm going to find somebody that I'm sexually compatible with and we're going to have great sex for the rest of our lives because of the fact that we're sexually compatible, that's based on the idea that you're never going to change sexually. That's stupid. You are absolutely going to change sexually. Absolutely. Your sex drive's going to change. Your body's going to change. I don't know if you know this or not, but you need to understand this. I know this is going to be hard for some of you to hear, but all of you need to hear this. For about 90% of us in this room, we're all going downhill from here. And I know some of you are here, you're like 33, you're like, yeah, but I'm part of the 10%. No, that was just for the teenagers in the room. They've got a couple more years. Sexually, you're going to change. About a year into our marriage, Anna found out that she had endometriosis. Every time I had sex with my wife, it hurt her. Excruciating pain. And for a while, it took sex off the table. You don't need to find someone that you're sexually compatible with. You need to find someone who has the character to love you when sex is off the table. You say, sex is off the table. That's never going to happen to me. I told you in week 1 about my grandfather. Every morning he'd get up and go and take my grandmother out of her. They couldn't even sleep in the same bed, let alone have sex. If they can't love you when sex is off the table, you're in trouble. Because it will be at some point. And she gets pregnant, the doctor walks in. He says, listen, you can't have sex anymore, 6 months bed rest. You say, no sex for 6 months? What the? For those of you who don't know what I was about to say, it's about sex. You need to find somebody who can love you when sex is off the table. And to develop a vision of sex and love that's about serving. And God says, I want for you to see sex as a really beautiful way in which you get to serve one another inside of marriage, which means when you're dating, that your vision is not just about you, but it's about the one that you eventually will spend the rest of your life with. And you decide, I'm going to serve them by not giving myself to someone before them. I'm going to serve them. And some of you are here and you say, that ship sailed. It doesn't mean that you can't go back to that. It doesn't mean that you can't shift your vision of love today. I said, no. I want for sex to be someone and something through which I get to serve the one to which I'm married. And so I'm going to serve them now, even before I know them. He decided to serve you before the story even began. I'm going to serve them now. And to serve the one that you're dating by helping them to do the same thing. I'm going to serve you. I'm going to serve you by helping you to serve the one that you will eventually be married to, whether it's me or someone else. I'm going to serve you by helping you to save that for them. Jesus steps into our lives and he presents us with an entirely different vision of love. It's not about us. It's about the ones that we love and about how we can serve them. It drastically impacts the way that we look at sex. Drastically impacts the way that we look at sex. May we leave behind our visions of love that crumble when they encounter the brokenness of the world. And may we begin to take hold of the vision of love that Jesus is calling us to. Listen to me. Do not buy into the lie that he is holding out on you. He is not trying to rob from you. He wants for you to be able to see and experience the beauty of what it is that you were created for and the journey that he had planned for you before the foundation of the world. Will you follow him into that? Will you pray with me? Father, I thank you for how your love changes everything. And Father, I pray for those who are here today who are in a marriage relationship. I pray that as they walk out of here, that they would have the courage to sit down with one another. That they would have the courage to sit down with one another and to ask that question: how can I love and serve you better through sex? I pray for those who are here today that porn has destroyed this in their life. I pray that they would take the steps necessary in order to be able to walk out of that. Father, I pray for those who are here today and they're saying, that ship's already sailed. I pray that they would trust that, no, you can bring restoration. And that they would trust you to shift that vision and begin to serve those around them and begin to serve the one that they'll spend the rest of their life with, even now, with this new vision of love. I thank you for what you've made possible in our lives. I thank you for how you continue to teach us how to love better and better and better. In Jesus' name, amen. If you're a first-time guest, please make sure you stop by Connection Point. We've got a free gift for you. Let's make sure we love him through our giving today. If you're here and you need someone to pray with you, there's going to be elders down front. They'd love to be able to do that. Next week, we continue the conversation and look at the next way in which he shifts this. Have a great week, guys. We'll see you next Sunday.